Good morning, everyone. My name is Lefteris Mamais. I'm co-founder and director at Evenflow, and I'm the work package leader for work package 5 under eShape. It's my great pleasure to be welcoming you for this session today. We will be discussing how eShape has basically created a number of new tools and opportunities to promote the economic sustainability of eShape outputs. As you may know, the main structure or facility that we will be supporting exactly this objective is the Sustainability Booster. This is a facility that is under development, but it's already to a large extent up and running. Several of its components, as you can see here, for instance, the IP and Innovation Office is now accessible online. It also has a whole bunch of activities that include relationships with key players out there. For instance, the IPR helpdesk, with whom we have agreed to host a webinar dedicated to this intersection between IP and innovation and the Earth observation sector. This hopefully will happen by the next General Assembly. We also have been producing a number of insights, often with the help of many of you in specific sectors under the Market Trends Observatory, and a few other things that you can see here. The aim of all this, of course, is to eventually supply the eShape pilots, but also the greater EuroGeo community with better access to markets, technology, capital, and knowledge. And this is served precisely through these different components that you are seeing here. Today, the main focus that our discussion will have is on those blocks with this dark blue outline, which are actually developed under Task 5.2. These are focusing on one hand, investment perspectives. So my colleague Nico Thom will be presenting to you the investment and funding landscape around Earth observation activities. He will also be discussing briefly about the Investment Readiness Support Program. And then in the next session today, you will be hearing more from my colleague Daire and Jeff from ERSC, who will be talking about the socioeconomic value analysis as we're going to perform it within eShape, and its importance in the terms of supporting, on one hand, decision makers to better understand what specific EO services have to offer in different value chains and thus direct their investments, but also, most importantly, in a sense, supporting the users in understanding exactly where the value lies and the service providers in being able to market their own proposition in a better way. So once again, the Sustainability Booster is fully in swing, and we hope that over the next months we will be enhancing its content. We'll be exchanging with you also with regards to the development of business plans or sustainability strategies for the different pilots, and eventually we will be able to provide you with the type of support you need. So starting today's journey, I will hand over to Nico Thom for the investment and funding landscape, and this will be followed by a session on how we market eShape pilots through the benefits they may generate. Under each of these, you will also hear some testimonies or insights provided by external actors. We felt that this would animate the discussion. And you will also have the chance after each of these sessions to raise your questions. Thank you very much.
Welcome to this session about the investment and funding landscape around Earth observation activities. My name is Nico Thom. I'm with Evenflow. We are the leaders of Work Package 5 in eShape. And the investment readiness support is one task within this work package. Also within the work package, we offer the so-called Sustainability Booster, which is a set of complementary services and tools. We provide inserts on developments and trends in market and technology, guidance, and certain tools, all of which are accessible via our website, sustainability.eshape.eu. Now, the investment readiness support activities are a bit both tool, namely the Investment and Funding Landscape Navigator, which is an online resource to identify sources of investment or funding, and guidance that we provide to you in order to prepare for being investment ready and to choose the most suitable instrument for funding or investment and to approach funds or investors. Now, when looking at the space sector, one can see that there's no lack of money really, and there's been an increase in investment. But if you look closer, that is only true in part because much of this investment happens in the US, and it is distributed across a number of application fields within the space sector, and Earth observation still gets just a fraction of that. And it is mostly venture capitalists and angel investors, again in the US, that fund space activities, while in Europe, in particular the early stage Earth observation companies or space companies in general, they still rely on institutional investors. And what one can see is that there's a big gap between early stage and growth phase, where there's not so much investment or funding available. Depending on the stage that you are in, and most of the eShape pilots could be considered very early stage, it is wise to choose a very specific vehicle for your investment or funding. And we have asked a representative of the private investment area, Fabrice Tester, for some advice.
Earth observation companies that want to scale, they have the same problems that any company that wants to scale, and that's all. From my experience, it's always the same. Yeah, of course, the need of capital for sure. Now it's true that companies that are not in the space sector, probably they are, let's say, much more, let's say, private money which is available. It's true that specifically for space companies, it's a bit more teeny, I would say, the amount of capital which is available. Because there are only a few funds which are really specialized in space. So that's probably one of the issues. I think when scaling, what is very important is also to have first a scalable business model and to have potential customers. And sometimes I think that some companies are very focused on the technology part. They want to build the best platform, or they want to launch their constellation of satellites. But in my opinion, the first thing they should try to have is customers. So to whom they will sell, let's say, the data, or to whom they will sell, let's say, the end product. And yeah, most of the time they don't focus probably enough on this. And for me, that's the most important, because as soon as you have customers, everything is possible, It's what drives revenues, it's what drives cash before, let's say, trying to get money from investors. And, in the startup world, many entrepreneurs, they want to raise funds, of course, before they get customers, but the first source of funding should be from customers. So I think they should spend more time trying to get revenues. I think in the space community, the issue is that, the amount of capital which is available is a bit much less than for, let's say, any other, let's say, tech company. There are in Europe a few specialized, let's say, funds like Seraphim Capital in UK that focus on downstream. There is now a new fund in Italy. In Luxembourg now there is Orbital Ventures too. In France there is a fund with CNRS Cosmic Capital. So in US there is Space Angels. So there are of course a few specialized funds, but when you see, let's say, the amount of venture capital or private equity which is available, let's say, for all, let's say, the different tech sectors, it's much, much more than just for space. So now a space company which is working on the downstream and data analytics, in my opinion, they should present themselves not really as a space company, but more as a company focused on agriculture, or I don't know, on food, or on fishing, etc. Because most of the time they present themselves as a space company, and probably it limits, let's say, their opportunities. Why, if they present themselves. No, we are a company, let's say, focusing on agriculture, on transportation, logistics, etc. But we use, let's say, space data. I think it will open, let's say, much more doors. If you go to a traditional, let's say, VC fund and you present yourself as a space company, if, let's say, the partners of the fund, if they don't have experience with space tech, they can be a bit scared, because space is always, for the let's say, insiders, it's always a bit mysterious, you know. Space, they think the launchers, they think about deep space, they think about long term before to have some payback, etc. And so it can scare some investors, space. That's my experience. You know, I'm part of some business angel network. When I speak about space, they always say, "Oh yeah, space," and they think it's a very long term. It's complicated. It's difficult. It costs a lot of money, etc. And they don't think immediately that space. A lot of space companies are just, let's say, exploiting space data, but they are active, as I said, in agriculture, logistics. Energy, etc. But they use, let's say, space data just as some others use different kinds of data. And I think if most of the space startups, they will present themselves just as a company active in this specific vertical, but not as a space company, it will be much easier from a communication perspective, in my opinion. So a lot of communication is required, and I think all the work which is done by association, like, for example, I'm the chairman of IBAN Space. We just did recently an online event with ESA to try to just explain, okay, what ESA is doing in terms of Earth observation, and it was more on environment and agriculture. So I think these kind of events are nice because let's say traditional, investors are attending this, and they better understand what, practically speaking, let's say, space can bring. So in my opinion, yes, it's all the work around, let's say, education that can help. I think NASA is, for example, doing a good job with their NASA TV. And I already said to ESA, you should have a ESA TV, you know, to try to educate, let's say, the people in the street, you know, what is space, what are the direct, let's say, benefits from space. So, and NASA is doing it, but I think in Europe we should do it too. But you know, all the startups that are coming, let's say, from research, like space or deep tech companies, they should try to get investors that understand what they do, and that they can see the potential of maybe the technology, and that maybe they will be patient enough, because most of the time these kind of companies, as you say, they are very early in the process. Maybe they have a promising technology, but there are still a lot of development to be done. Which means a lot of money probably to put on the table to sustain this development. But again, for the entrepreneurs, I think what is important is to, even if it will take a lot of time, I think what they should try to demonstrate is that not only they can get, let's say, long-term profitable business, but that at a reasonable short time frame, they will be able to generate some revenues and some profits. And unfortunately, let's say, most of these people that come from research are not, let's say, businessmen, so they don't have probably this perspective. They focus too more on the technology. So they should, I think, in the co-founding team, try to have people that have the business perspective and that can challenge them about, let's say, the fact that at some point, it's nice to have a good technology, but if you cannot sell and if you cannot have customers, it's just useless. There are a few, let's say, specialized, let's say, space funds. There are some traditional, let's say, funds that invest more and more into space. I would say this is probably more in the US than in Europe. There are also some business angel networks that are specialized in that. So it's evolving, probably not fast enough, but it's evolving. And globally, there has been a quite significant amount of money that has been invested in the space field. So I'm not sure that space is really missing, let's say, money today. But of course, things can be improved. Funds or deep tech, let's say, investors, I think they are the ones who are the best, let's say, able to understand these kind of companies. Sometimes some family offices might be also eventually interested in these kind of investments. There are many success stories and well-known, let's say, names. If you take Planet ICE that just raised $87 million, I think there are plenty of nice companies that have raised quite a lot of money. But when you look at them, I think they've always, the basic, let's say, pillars for me, for a good, let's say, company. They have generally a very good team. And I think that's very important to convince, let's say, investors. They have a very good technology with some secret sauce. The market generally is quite huge, and they can demonstrate that they will be able to generate revenues at a reasonable time frame. And somehow they are also at the right time. I mean, if you take Planet or ICE, etc. For example, ICE did something related to the COVID. Planet, of course, it's related to Earth observation and to help for environmental problems, etc. So I think, they come with something which also, can get some momentum. But it's always a combination of, let's say, all, and they have probably an approach which is a bit different from the rest, or they are the first one. If Planet was, of course, among, let's say, the first companies. Or ISI with SAR, let's say, satellites, they were one of the first ones. So I think that's probably a bit the secret to try to convince investors. I was part yesterday of the jury of Copernicus Accelerator, and there are great companies, but there are also plenty. It's always the same. Fishing, crops grow, and these kind of things. And there are too many companies that want to do the same. So at some point, it's nice to be a bit different from others, and to do something which is a bit different, somehow revolutionary, maybe something that can seem crazy initially, but which can be anyway materialized. So, personally, I'm looking at this kind of ventures.
EIB has published a very interesting report, The Future of the European Space Sector, and they have conducted a survey among different actors from the space sector. Again, only some of them represent the Earth observation part. And they have given reasons why they chose a very specific type of investment, private or public, which you can see the responses here. And we have also reached out to a startup, or already in their 6th year, they are a mature company, Satagro from Poland, which is a precision agriculture startup, to explain to us how they chose not to get investment, and how it actually helped them more to get some seed funding first, be exposed to customers early, because the feedback is often more valuable, and the revenue that you generate from them than to rely on funding, and how through partners they then matured because they got access to expertise, which again was more crucial for them than money.
I am Przemysław Żelazowski. I come from Warsaw in Poland, and I was always interested in environment and conservation biology, actually, and ecology, evolution, even more in the beginning than anything related to satellite monitoring. And I have realized that actually it would really make sense to engage with agriculture. So Satagro's mission is to enable the farm to benefit in multiple ways from the evolving sector of satellite observation. And we can say that we are evolving together with the satellite monitoring sector. And if you look at the timeline of how we evolved, it's really intrinsically linked to what is available, what's possible at the moment. And it's been really cool because it's really, really dynamic. And it's great because we feel like we are, quite early adopters, and we try to be quick. So with time, we discovered that there are, quite a few areas where satellites can help. But the key area is variable rate application. So this is the keystone of precision agriculture. This is a technology which allows the farm to go from uniform application of things that are usually more or less harmful for the environment to actually doing it in a much more smart way. And this is where satellites can be extremely helpful. So I've managed to get a seed grant from the EU funds distributed through the Polish administration, because we are in Poland still in a phase of being an important beneficiary of EU structural funds that adjust the level of living across the countries in Europe. So we got about €100,000 seed that has allowed to produce the first prototype of the Satagro service. And it took just over a year, I guess, for us to have this living prototype. And it was the beginning of 2015 season. So one could say that we've been alive for 6 years by now. So we don't necessarily feel like a proper startup anymore. More like a company in the process of scaling up. In the beginning, in let's say the year 2015, we were super successful and super lucky, not yet successful, but lucky in that we have enter like an informal partnership with somebody who's really interested in precision agriculture in Poland. Somebody who's well recognized in Poland, but not really recognized elsewhere, but still, like a proper a local expert that was inspiring us in terms of the real challenges in the area of agronomy. that could be tackled with satellites, with space observation. And I think that this was one of the really key elements or key pieces of the puzzle that made this project quite real from the beginning. Because this person, Jerzy Koronczak, he has introduced us to a few progressive farms who were quite excited about what we have offered, and they enthusiastically started working with us as clients, as first clients, so quite early on started the process of this creative interaction between the power users and the creators, and the constant feedback that we were receiving from them, without which I think it would be very easy to drift into some theoretical realms or some very minute technical challenges, which would only help the cause marginally. After winning some national competition, startup competition, that was actually organized by the president of Poland. We were approached by Grupa Azoty, which is one of the national companies, and this is I think well, I'm not sure now if it's the biggest or second biggest producer of nitrogen fertilizers in Europe. So that's quite a company, and initially we were quite surprised that they want to work with us, because as we immediately told the CEO, we thought that we have a clash of missions, as we called it. So Grupa Azoty's mission to us appeared to be sell as much fertilizer as possible, whereas our mission was to allow the farmers to use as little fertilizer as possible. But they didn't see it this way, luckily. And that was explained quite nicely, why there was no conflict. And they seem to be perfectly aware of the technological developments and the need to give the farmer more than just fertilizer. That there needs to be like a proper relationship with expertise, and with some checks and balances linked to environment. And at first we signed a contract for a few years, where Grupa Azoty obliged itself that they will provide us an increasing amount of hectares for which we will be providing the service. And these hectares are managed by their good customers, let's say. So they're willing to give the Sotagro service pretty much for free to a number of their clients. And so this is a very nice baseline to have. It's not a proper investment. It's something even better than investment. I mean, in the end, Grupa Azoty also bought 5% of Sotagro, but that was from one of our partners. It wasn't a direct investment into a company, but it was under a mutual agreement that this is what's going to happen, and there was also in the context of this longer term collaboration where they pay for some of our service. And as I say, it's a really nice baseline, which also suddenly expanded vastly the number of experts with whom we consult what we should do to be really useful. Because in fact, Grupa Azoty has a number of agronomy advisors who work with these farms directly. And it was as if we had employed 20 new regional representatives with whom we are directly in touch, and from whom we regularly get a feedback. And then we also started partnerships with a number of important companies. One of them is Planet. It's really nice to be able to have a bit more security around frequency of data. Mind you that when we started in 2015, we didn't have sentinels available. I mean, optical sentinels available at the time. So we actually made a few promises on which we could not deliver properly. And I think actually it wasn't just our case those days. There was a period where the potential of satellite monitoring for farms was clear, but the technological readiness was not there yet. We actually heard some stories from the farmers in the United States who had access to satellite data streams quite a long time ago, and they were all quite discouraged because there wasn't enough data available, and the service was not good enough. So actually, some of the early developments and some of the attempts early on, before our times, were sometimes kind of working against us. But now the situation is much different. It's so important that the sentinels started working, and we could really see that things started moving properly with the first launch of Sentinel-2. Partner is John Deere. The really big challenge for a company in our area is to be compatible with machinery. And there's a lot of machinery available. And each farm you approach, you realize that they have a slightly different constellation. Because this will evolve with times, and then you can have a different machinery and a different terminal that manages the data, and sometimes the farmer would modify it somehow, or put some really surprising pieces of equipment together. So we actually had to spend a lot of effort to be compatible with the range of machinery, and now we rarely have a problem with compatibility. We were lucky in that we've managed so far to develop organically for all these years. But we are also aware that had we access to more funds, we would be faster. Okay, we are always thinking really hard about prioritizing work, and we can only engage with certain tasks at once. If we had access to more funds and hence had more people employed, we would move twice as fast. The reason why we didn't get an investor so far is partly because of our internal constraints, which is that in our team, for most of the time, there's nobody with proper business and marketing background. We don't feel, or for a long time, we didn't feel exactly, comfortable in the area of building relationships with potential investors. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I think in the area where we come from, Poland, and all the other economies in transition, the startups, investors, ecosystem is not as mature as elsewhere. And we were approached a few times. We had some opportunities to be invested in, but we were realizing that this doesn't come with enough expertise. I mean, we understood early on that expertise is key. It's actually more important than money. Giving away equity is always risky. We've actually, had some experience with the conflict within the company, which we have later resolved. But we could see how much it can slow things down for a year or longer. Having an investor is a really huge decision, and it needs to be the right partner, ideally coming with an expertise in our area, because everybody needs to think really hard about how things should evolve to do something meaningful on this emerging market. So these are the reasons why we didn't have a proper investor so far. This said, I think we are much more ready now. It's not something that's necessary, but we can definitely see that we have capacity to speed things up. We have a service that's fully developed in a number of aspects, but we have, the same amount of aspects that's in the pipeline, and things could happen faster. These are the factors that one need to consider when thinking about the investment. It's really nice to be in a position that we know we will survive, just going as we go. But again, since we feel that what we have is really helpful and worth scaling up, this is why the question of accepting an investment in the company becomes increasingly relevant. We had a proposal some time ago. Somebody wanted to buy the whole company, and we have said no. Even though, I could be a very happy man after that. But the thinking was that losing control almost completely would mean that our ideas on how this should develop, and also crucially the flexibility that we have to evolve, would be most likely compromised. So it was a hard decision, but we have realized that actually it's too early, and the most important is that we demonstrate that what we think we can do, we can really deliver. And we at the time we were scared that the flexibility that we have as a small startup, without anybody overlooking and steering our actions, that without that opportunity we may not deliver Since then, we've delivered a lot more. So we are, I guess, more comfortable in this regard. But yeah, still, I don't regret that earlier decision.
Okay, now having done the mapping of the investment and funding landscape, on one side there are different types of public funding opportunities that we have added to our database. There are EU grants, different financial instruments, competitions such as also the Copernicus prizes, different accelerators that you also of course have in the private area, incubators, and the regional and national funds. While on the private side, most notable are the angel investors and the venture capital companies. But there are also a lot of corporate venture capitalists, in particular across the different verticals that eShape is also addressing. Or crowdfunding is increasingly used as a means of getting private investment. And you will find all those that we have already added to our database very soon. It is going online on the 22nd of October, so very soon. And if you can't wait, you can already look at the work in progress under sustainability.eshape.eu/investment-funding.
Now this online interface on our website will allow you to browse for the different types of investment or funding, depending on your priorities, depending on the investment stage that you want to be in, the company stage that you are in, and if you're interested in an investor that really knows your specific sector well and has a focus on the
Thank
sector.
you very much for your attention.
You can also
So the Investment and Funding Landscape Navigator is soon online for you to use, and we are there for you to advise you what
Hello, everyone. So this is Lef. I guess we have all enjoyed seeing these different testimonies. We are entering now the Q&A session. Nico would be mostly handling potential questions, as this is the session that he has been presiding over. But if you have any specific questions, you can either raise them through the chat, or I guess you can also take the floor. And I mean, we would have really not that much time, but of course, you know, this is, we mentioned it is a journey. So the whole idea is that we would be having this type of interaction and this type of subjects over all the coming months in eShape. So yeah, if somebody wants to raise a concrete question, please do so. Okay, I see we have no takers. There's probably too much information to absorb. Maybe just one point to make on our side. So Nico just presented the current stage of the investment and funding landscape navigator. As he mentioned, this will be enriched. Of course, if at any point you have any feedback, either on the content or the features, please share that with us. Also, if you have any specific questions that are triggered by simply, you know, navigating through that. And I should say that in general, we are intending to basically have a sort of cross-fertilization between the activity related to investment landscape mapping and the Market Trends Observatory, where basically we will be producing some articles that look a little bit deeper into the investment landscape or into specific pains, let's say, or constraints that different types of actors in the Earth observation sector face. So you will be seeing things related to scaling in particular. You will be seeing some of the points that Przemek
or Fabrice have also brought forward and been analyzed in a little bit greater detail. Yeah, and hopefully this will motivate or inspire the whole group involved in eShape to pursue these different routes in a more confident way. So if no question has been raised in the meantime on the chat, but I actually see that there is one question. So, all right, so Nicolas has mentioned the point about confidentiality. I suppose you mean confidentiality with regards to what a company is developing and how the eShape team would help in that regard, or how the investors that might be involved would be engaged there? All right, and there's a next question about how pilots can engage with the funding organizations. So, okay, so for the first part, within eShape, and when this really reaches its full maturity, we would have all the measures in place, meaning NDAs or anything else that might make you developing the pilots feel comfortable exchanging with us. I mean, on our side, we have no vested interest in any of this as such. And on the other hand, with regards to how the pilots would engage with the different funding organizations, the idea is that we would facilitate a sort of matchmaking, meaning in the interaction that we will be having anyway over the next months with the different pilots in order to develop business plans and sustainability strategies, we would also try to shed some light on exactly investment needs or investment intentions, if you wish. And we will provide some advice, and eventually we will also try to link up those developing the pilots with those that could potentially provide them with funding. So I hope this answers these questions that have been raised. And then looking at the time, I think we should now move to the second part of the session, where we'll be hearing more from Daire and Jeff. So I suppose the video will start now. All right.
Hi, my name is Daire Boyle. I'll be doing the introduction to the socioeconomic analysis approach within the eShape project. So the purpose of the socioeconomic analyses, first obvious idea is that eShape will deliver benefits to its engaged users. But what is often overlooked is that there are additional stakeholders further along the value chain that also experience benefits. The aim of our studies is to highlight and quantify wherever we can all of the benefits that are derived from the eShape pilot services further downstream across all value chains. The purpose of doing so, the purpose of understanding the benefits, there are three main reasons. It provides a powerful justification of business case. When you understand the benefits, you can develop more impactful and fit-for-purpose services. And maybe the most important one is understanding the benefits allows you to stimulate a wider uptake of the service through marketing. So who are the audience for these reports? Well, they're decision makers who can use the findings of the reports to justify future investments. Users of the services can make better use of EO services once they know where the value lies. Service providers can provide solid arguments and back up their business cases. And the citizens can appreciate the value of the EO services. So the socioeconomic analysis within the project, there are three deliverables, 5.8, 5.16, 5.21, due in months 23, 30, and 40. Each will focus on a different sector. Currently, the first one will focus on food security and sustainable agriculture. The second two, disasters and water resource management, these are still to be confirmed, but as it stands, this is what the three deliverables will focus on. There'll be a glossy, eye-catching publications which can be used as marketing tools, as already discussed, within the eShape community, but also within the wider EuroGeo community. The framework that is developed for these analyses was developed in a separate project, a European Space Agency project called the Sentinel Benefits Study. Essentially, it looks at novel ways in which Copernicus Sentinel data is being used by companies, by people. We then do a value chain analysis of this, produce these glossy reports that you see on the right. This is a quick snapshot of the value chain analysis approach in all of these studies, which will also be used within eShape, where we usually have a 4-tier system, a service provider, then a primary user, and so on, each deriving benefits. You can see we talk about the types of benefits and where the value is manifested along each section of the value chain. Just to go a little bit further on this, we have a 3-pillar approach to all of our analyses. As already discussed, there's the value chain analysis. We generally have 4 stages. There can be more, there can be offshoots, but it usually starts with a service provider providing an EO service, a dedicated primary user, then people feeling the benefits beyond that, maybe a user of the primary user, and finally end users, citizens and society. At each stage, we'll try to understand the types of benefits. So there's some examples here. You can have cost savings, time savings, increased productivity, increased quality. All of these, there can be multiple different types of benefits at each stage. We'll try to understand each one of them, gather them all, understand what are the financial or economic benefits of each, and finally come up with a full model of the full economic benefit behind each service. So beyond just economic value, through all of the presentations or all of the reports we've done, we've also found some commonalities and different types of benefits, not just economic benefits. Jeff, who will be speaking later on, will go through this in more detail. But there are 6 categories. Obviously, the first is economic, then environmental, societal, regulatory benefits, innovation, and science and technology. As I said, Jeff will go into this in more detail, but in every report we do, we try to match benefits to these 6 dimensions. The third pillar is the extrapolation of the results that we find. So we obviously focus on specific value chains, but then we'll try to generalize and extrapolate the results to show a potential of how even further value could be derived from such a service. So there are 2 ways of doing this. You can do a geographic extrapolation, where this is particularly relevant to Earth observation as it can cover the entire globe. So we'll ask ourselves questions: does this specific service address a problem that is present in a different country? Then, does this country have a similar climate, similar geography, and finally a similar business ecosystem and regulations? If it does, then there's a strong possibility that the benefits we've already accounted for could be extrapolated across a wide geographic region in other countries all across the world. To do this, we set up a type of lens system where we can zoom in and zoom out. So the first extrapolation we'll do will be to the global market, which is obviously a huge market. We'll come up with some assumptions on an extrapolation to that market. Then we'll use assumptions to break it down even further to a serviceable, available market. And in some of the eShape pilots, this will be the European market. It's not limited to the European market. This is just an idea of the way we can break down from global to regional, and then finally to local, which is the serviceable, obtainable market. This is the market that the eShape pilots can really attack right out of the gate, and is the market in which their services will be most effective. So this gives an idea of the type of the zooming in and zooming out of geographical extrapolation that we can do. The second type of extrapolation is a market penetration. So we often find in the cases that we study, there's a very committed primary user. This usually ends up being the market entry point for the service provider. But what we often find is the service provider, their service can be widely accessible either through the internet or through an application online. And also the back end can be provided at scale, meaning the data that they take in, or the back end processing, can actually be scaled up quite economically, and it makes sense to scale services up. So when you have a widely available access, very low barriers to access the service, you have a scalable back end. What we then can do is, using some assumptions in the market and using the primary user as the market entry point, this can then be developed into branching out in the market and getting new users. So that's the second type of extrapolation we will do. That's really the introduction of the socioeconomic analyses for eShape, how we tackle the problem and how we produce the reports. Jeff will be discussing this in much further detail. Jeff Sawyer from ERSC, and then after that, Vito will be given a first-hand insight into the value that these studies can bring. Thank you for your attention.
So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where we've got to in the agenda. Daire has explained the broad approach that we will adopt for looking at the socioeconomic analyses, and I'll go into a bit more detail and give you an example of the way we're working, the way we expect to work on eShape. So, as I say, I'll provide a bit more detail on how we'll approach the analysis. The goal is to work at showcase level, drawing upon the specific experiences, specific services drawn from the pilots. And as we're going to be basing around eSeBS, we want to draw pilots which relate to cases that we've done in eSeBS, which gives us the basic information to work from. So we're looking to extrapolate the benefits of the selected pilots using the examples, using the indicators that we've generated in eSeBS in order to look at the prospective benefits for eShape pilots. And we'll do that both in geographical terms, so taking from one country to a wider regional approach, probably the European Union size. We'll look at different thematics, so how agriculture can work with cereals or with potatoes or with fruit trees. We'll look at the user base, so the different markets, so how we can extend from the primary user that we identify in eSeBS into a wider market, and maybe technology as well, because for some of the applications, as the technology matures, it becomes more performant. This is particularly true in agriculture, where as data is built up over the years around a specific field or specific farm, so they get to know more about the way in which that field performs, and so the performance of the use of the application can be made better. So now looking at eSeBS, the Sentinel benefit studies, our early studies focus very much on the economic benefits. But a figure in euros is nice, it tells a nice story, but our cases so far, talking with users, show that much more value is generated, which is not economic in nature. So our goal has been to move beyond just economics to examine the full range of benefits generated through the use of an EO product or service. And so we'll take a holistic approach, which will look at both the quantitative, the numbers, and the qualitative benefits. And let me explain that a bit further. So in the cases that we've analysed under eSeBS, we found that primary users give us insights into these extended qualitative benefits. So just a few examples here. In Ireland, looking at flood mapping, we found that the service using Sentinel data helped the different emergency services work together by establishing a common operating picture. And in Belgium, it was somewhat similar. Different stakeholders at federal, regional level, playing different positions in the value chain, the farmers, the potato merchants, the industry which is processing those and turning them into French fries or other products. The ability to have a picture of the whole of Belgium has helped bring together a stakeholder forum to look at to work better together. In Sweden, we looked at the use of forest land. There are 300,000 farmers, all acting individually, 300,000 families who own different parts of the woodland, all acting individually. And the goal is to extend the value of the timber at the national level. So it's federating from 300,000 to improving the quality at national level. So it's a strategic goal. And in Greenland, a very strategic picture emerges of the position of Greenland in the global strategic sense, and which is helped by having a picture of the way the ice is changing and helping ships move through the ice. And then in Norway, better regulation. So the fact that movement of the ground is known, not just where it's moving, but when, enables better regulation, better limits to be set, knowing that satellite data can help monitor the situation. And this is also true of CAP. We haven't got a case which specifically looks at CAP yet, but we know that the new CAP has been designed to take account of the fact that Sentinel data is there. So it's better regulation, knowing that Sentinel data is available. So this leads us to create or to work with 6 dimensions of value, define 6 dimensions of value. So the economic dimension, the environmental dimension, the regulatory dimension, the innovation and entrepreneurship, the advancements in science and technology, and societal. And the goal here is that the pilots can enable benefits in these 6 different dimensions, and we'll be looking at those as we go through. Now, the basis of our approach is the value chain. So we define a number of tiers, starting with the service provider, the supplier of the service. Then we try to identify a primary user. In this case, we have identified a roads authority, but that might be a farmer. It might be the National Emergency Service. It might be a shipping line. Then we look at who's benefiting as a result of that primary user doing a better job. So the roads authority are able to construct better roads, maybe more quickly in areas, and the engineering construction companies can also benefit from the use of the technology. And finally, citizen society also benefit by having roads which are closed for a shorter period of time, because the work is done more effectively. So the value chain approach is central to our approach, and the 6 dimensions of value are present at each of the tiers of the value chain. So each one of these we will examine for those 6 dimensions of value. And just an example, because for each of those we define different indicators. So for each of the dimensions, I just give an example of the environmental dimension, and the sorts of indicators we're looking at are reduced pollution, reduced impact on biodiversity, reduced depletion of natural resources. And this list isn't complete, and we're working to populate it further. And then we take each of those qualitative benefits, so the 6 dimensions, but in reality probably the 5 dimensions, and we apply it for all 6 dimensions, and we're looking at the scale of the benefit. So if there's no benefit identified at all, then there'll be no star. We use stars, not just blobs. If there's a latent potential but it hasn't come out in the case, then we'll give it 1 star. And then if there is a benefit which has been identified, then depending whether it's low, moderate, high, or exceptional, we give it 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. And you'll see an example of that as we go on later. So in this, in the project, in eShape, what we're looking to do is to extrapolate the benefits and to understand how the data is delivering value to different applications. So we already identified that agriculture will be the first showcase that we're going to tackle. The reason for that is because it's an eShape showcase, agriculture and food security, and we have examples from eSeBS which are quite well defined, which will enable us to tackle this extrapolation. We haven't started with agriculture as yet. We have the eSeBS cases, but we haven't looked at the extrapolation or bringing those together into the sense that we will do so for eShape. So what I'm going to do is to explain our thinking by taking an example from INSAR, which is monitoring ground motion. We actually have 4 cases completed. One is awaiting publication, is awaiting approval of the primary user. But we have 3 cases which are published: aquifer monitoring in Spain, with the focus around the excess abstraction of water and the impact on housing. Pipeline infrastructure in the Netherlands with a focus on underground gas and water supplies, and then ground motion in Norway with a focus on roads management. So aquifer monitoring in Spain, what's going on here is that the River Basin Management Authority, CHS in this case, abstracts water from deep underground sources. If too much water is abstracted, then this can lead to subsidence of the ground surface and potential damage to property in the region over quite a large area. So IGME, the Spanish Geological Survey, and Daire, a Spanish startup, are supplying maps showing the ground movement. And this is then monitored to see if there has been an excessive movement. It's replacing expensive in situ sensors at each of the wellheads. You see a wellhead shown here. It can lead to better regulations because precise measurements can be made using INSAR. And just a quick word here for those unfamiliar with INSAR. It enables movement of the ground on the Earth's surface to be measured to millimeter accuracy. So millimeter movements can show up in satellite images. It's quite astonishing, even though this is part of my own background. And so here at the bottom, you have a little pictorial which takes each of the dimensions, and alongside you have the stars or the blobs indicating the qualitative assessment and the contribution. So economically, there's something like 32 to 72 million of economic benefit per annum possible using this technology. This is over the whole of Spain, so we already extrapolated to the whole of Spain. And then environmental terms, we rate this as 2 stars, innovation 2 stars, regulatory 3 stars, science and technology 2 stars, and the societal benefits as 1 star. So the next case was infrastructure monitoring in the Netherlands. This was actually one of the very first cases we did. But what's going on here is that the ground moves, but the houses, and so often the pipes, are anchored to infrastructure which is deeply piled into the ground. So the infrastructure is stable, but the ground is moving. So the effect is to introduce tensions in the pipelines, especially where they enter the houses. So satellite data in submaps are generated by a company called SkyGeo, and they're used by pipeline operators, Stedin and Oasen. Stedin is a gas pipeline operator in the Netherlands. Oasen is a water pipeline operator. And they can identify connections at high risk. And so that enables them to plan to do regular maintenance, but based around the risk of fracture. So instead of shooting blind, as it were, and needing to plan maintenance over a long period of time where they don't really know where the problems are likely to emerge in the future, they're able to address those areas of higher risk, and they're able to address them together because they can see the movement that's going on. And this allows better investment of the resources by the pipeline operators. It gives less risk to the consumers due to gas leaks or disruption of major water leaks. And public authorities can plan their own operations in a much more effective way. And we estimated the benefits today between 6.6 and 7.9 million euros per annum. The full potential, and this again is part of the learning process, we estimated it's between 15 and 18 million. Now, one of the features here of this is that it's using Sentinel data, but it's also using commercial high-resolution data. So the particular facet of this case is the combination of the two. On the left, you see a Sentinel image, an INSAR image generated using Sentinel data. The green dots are those points where there are measurements taken and there is no movement. And progressive movement is shown through orange and red dots. And you can see that more effectively on the right-hand side. But the measurements using Sentinel are quite sparse on the ground. So if more detailed information is needed, then something like TerraSAR-X has been used, which has a finer spatial resolution on the ground and enables the movements to be monitored more precisely. And you can see the impact of that on this wider picture of Rotterdam, where the pipeline running along the road, or the road, is seen to be moving, and there's a problem that can be addressed by Stedin or ASIN, depending on where their pipes are running. And there's a problem in an area here which they can also address. So this is where Sentinel data is being used, but not necessarily to provide the end story. It's used to trigger to use TerraSAR-X data. So then the final example is the ground motion monitoring in Norway. Here, the Norwegian Geological Service has developed a service which is known as INSAR Norway, extends over the whole of Norway. It's essentially an annual map of movement, and it's been picked up and used by the Norwegian Roads Authority, the NPRA, to support the construction and management of roads. Through its use, they can identify a number of different features, so they can see where large-scale movement is occurring. They can identify the risk of damage to roads and buildings, which will help inform better the design process. If they know that there's potential for movement in one area, they can adapt the design. And I'll talk about that in a minute with this tunnel that you see on the right. They can also identify liabilities where construction has led to damage in nearby buildings or houses, and identify whether it's that damage has occurred as a result of the construction work or whether it was going to happen anyway. And as a side benefit, they also, and this was in fact the original purpose that the Norwegian Geological Survey identified, was to identify potential rock slides where those can fall into the fields and cause local tsunami. And there are several examples in the past of significant damage and loss of life due to these tsunami. So again, here you can see the pictorial at the bottom with the different qualitative assessments of the benefits, and the quantitative assessment is something between 4 and 9 million euro of benefit per annum to Norway for the roads management service through the use of the INSAR. Now, what emerged in this case was 3 very specific uses of INSAR in relation to roads management. So that helps us go further in our analysis. So the first one is a new road that was being constructed across the head of a field. This was to avoid passing through this area where there'd been a couple of accidents and 1 child was killed as a car was pushed into the field by a rock slide coming down here. So rather than monitor that, I think it was an avalanche rather than a rock slide, in fact, they decided to build this road across the field. They laid ballast into the field to build the road. The ballast takes time to settle, so they installed 4 corner reflectors along the ballast, and by using INSAR they can see to very high precision when the ballast has settled to a tolerable level, and hence they can carry on with the next phase of works. So this saves time in the work and saves costs through reduced survey costs to go out and monitor where the ballast has got to. The second use case is in Oslo, a particular area in the centre of Oslo around the railway station. There's a mixture of old and new buildings, and a new centre was built, the Bjørvika Centre, which caused disruption to the area, and where some of the buildings were sitting on old wooden piles, for instance the station, there was significant movement seen as a result of the new work. And what this shows is that it's not just a question of knowing where movement has occurred, but when. so that if you know when it's occurred, you can link that to where the work's been going on, and you can improve the knowledge and improve the dispute resolution as a result of using the satellite data. And the third case, which is perhaps in some ways the most dramatic, this tunnel in Tonsberg, it's the same tunnel, we saw the mouth of the tunnel on the earlier picture. It was built 12 years ago, opened in about 2008, designed from 2005, 2006, and it suffered regular problems with cracks opening up around the mouth of the tunnel. And the engineers, they'd done studies on this, but they could not understand what was going on. They knew there was movement, but they couldn't tell where. Now the tunnel is built on very long piles, 70 to 90 meter piles, so the tunnel is very stable. And what's going on here, and which was able to be identified using INSAR, and I think INSAR is the only way that this could be identified, is that there's a large movement going on. So on the left-hand side, you've got a wider picture. You can see the roads leading up to the tunnel on the left-hand side. The tunnel head is here, and this is the town of Tonsberg. You've got a close-up here, and you can see the tunnel is shown. Now, again, the yellow and red are where the ground is moving. And in this case, of course, INSAR is monitoring vertical movement, but what's happening is that the whole ground, it's an old moraine, glacial moraine, is sliding down into the fjord. Now, it happens that the mouth of the tunnel was just about at the edge of the area that's sliding down. So this part is moving, the tunnel is rigidly fixed on those deep piles, and so cracks are opening up at the tunnel. So INSAR is enabled to identify what was going on here. Now, if they'd known that at the beginning, they would have designed the tunnel differently. So there would have been a significant cost savings in the longer term through the lack of need to take remedial work, through knowing that this wide-scale movement was going on. So those are 4 different examples of links between the INSAR and the applications, and the way in which the satellite technology is helping. And we will do the same sort of approach for 3 cases in eShape, starting with agriculture, and then we will define 2 other use cases that we'll address in subsequent reports. So final reflections on that: the comparison between the different cases helps us define better models and understand the limitations of our assumptions and the estimations that we've made in going through the case. The non-economic benefits can often resonate with stakeholders even better than the economic ones. So examples being, if there's a very strong environmental component, a very strong regulatory component, as indeed is the case with CAP, then stakeholders can be more in sympathy with the use of satellite data and the story around those other dimensions. Extrapolation of the value builds upon the indicators that we've defined. So we'll probably add to the list of indicators as we go through eShape cases. But extrapolation of the value takes each one of those indicators and looks how it can apply over a wider geographical mean, over a wider thematic application, over a different market, or whether the technology has a role to play. So overall, our eShape analysis will focus on this extrapolation of value. It will be applied to the selected pilot, starting with agriculture. And I think we start this work fairly soon, and should have a first report available in around 6 months' time, I think. So that's giving that deeper picture. I now hand back to Lef and Daire, and I think we will hear from Stefan Krekels. Thank you very much for your time. Bye.
I would actually like you, Stephen, to introduce yourself briefly, if you could.
Sure. So my name is Steven Krekels. I'm responsible for the remote sensing department within Vito, and we are located in Mol, Belgium.
And actually today we would have the pleasure to discuss with you a little bit your experience, and especially the aftermath of this experience in doing an analysis. It was called potato growing in Belgium. We did it under the Sentinel Economic Benefit Study, but we sort of want to understand a little bit more why this was important for you in the first place, and what have you gained essentially from doing it afterwards?
Well, the advantages are multiple. So as you know, we are a technological research organization. So we sometimes do a deep dive in technology and forget a little bit on the economics. So it was good to find a partner that could do an analysis of the broader environment of the potato growing and processing industry to help us build up the business case, and also to help us to convince not only the industry to be open for such an initiatives, but also to financially support us to develop some more. So I think those benefits were really clear and useful.
Right, so this actually had quite a tangible impact in that sense.
Yes, the moment you talk to companies, they want to see, a bang for the bucket.
Yeah.
And then if we as a technology institute come with a study, they would say, yeah, but you want to do this. So if there's an external party that has done the study that is more neutral and objective, and secondly, that clearly shows the benefits that help us in the acceptance of this new technology in the domain of potato processing.
I see. And from what I remember from the study, there were quite a few stakeholders eventually involved in the value chain that was analyzed. And I was wondering if following the study, you have seen any, let's say, ability for better relationships or more trust, or somehow even simply better awareness of what's really happening among the different stakeholders.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we of course have the COVID situations, which kind of disturbed the entire scheme that we had in mind. But what, amongst others, the study helped us is to convince the potato processing industry to really take this a step further. And we came together with them, or financed by them, with an initiative that we would be paying the farmers to fill in the data fields, so that we don't only have the remote sensing data, but that we also have necessary ground information of what happened on the field, what management practices, yields and stuff like that. And as you know, everybody knows data is the new gold. So if you want to convince farmers that they have to give you the data, they will not do it for free. And there was a big incentive from the Belgian processing industry to help us to get data of the farmers by really a paid fee when they fill in the right and proper data. So in all that type of convincing, this study helped a lot as a neutral, objective financial information source.
And then I guess this means that in the longer term, having now developed this type of relationship, you can see your service being more sustainable, I suppose, once you have more farmers logging in, let's say, sharing their data, receiving the benefits.
Yeah. As said, unfortunately, with COVID, we were not, I would say, on top of the mind of a lot of people, because the industry and the sector has gone through some tough times. People are not eating that much fries anymore, and it's an export-driven, or it's an export-based crop, at least. But we have seen a take-up in data being provided, and especially people understanding that we need to do this for a couple of years more before we really can do the analysis on stuff like crop rotation and long-term benefits, which type of crops need to be planted before potatoes in what type of soil, that type of awareness that this is a long-term race and not a sprint, so to speak, that has been very clear and accepted by our colleagues in the processing industry.
And would you say that, because this is something that I always felt may be a useful aspect for a company doing such a study, that in principle, and because most Earth observation services are not hyper-local, meaning that, of course, once you set up the ecosystem appropriately and you have some client relationships and so on, you could provide similar services beyond the original place where you start from. And I was wondering if you would have experience, or at least you're intending to use such a study in that regard.
Yeah, so it is indeed, like we always say, that what we do for the potato is just one crop. And we can expand that to different crops, to different regions easily. But, you have to have done something successful in your own backyard before you can explore and further develop in other domains or in other geographical areas. And so that's indeed what we did with the potatoes.
Okay, so now it's going beyond, of course, the, let's say, Belgian borders.
Yeah, it's not there yet, but at least we're talking. And it gives us a good reference, especially, like said, that another organization has looked into the case, and where we say, this is what we done in Belgium with this type of crop. Please have a read, go through it, and reflect on what it would mean for your crop and your geographical environment. So it's a good example, and especially it's a good example with some euro numbers too. And that is always interesting to
put hard numbers next to the claims, let's say, that one might make.
Yeah, because we see that people are, I would say, opening the door, and they listen to us on some kind of gut feeling, but quickly after the gut feeling, especially when you ask time and money, then they want to see numbers. Yeah, and then the studies like this one help us a lot.
All right. And maybe a final question. This is not necessarily always applicable, and in a certain way, it's more under a sort of self-reflection notion, because what we have seen in some other cases where we were studying different value chains, different services, was that by raising all sorts of questions, not necessarily only for the service provider or the primary user, but across the different steps of the value chain, you actually end up understanding better the processes that are involved, and understanding better maybe how your client serves their client further down. Was there any such feature or aspect in your case?
Yeah, so having a tool like Watch It Grow enabled us to get in touch indeed with different players of the value chain and gave us an opportunity to have a better understanding of their particular problems. Like, for instance, more in the area of the seed breeding, for instance, which is not necessarily something which we targeted in the first place, but you realize that also there solutions like this could play a role. So by understanding and talking to different players in the value chains, the opportunities pop up. And also sometimes you can act as an organization in between two players of the value chains, because you're not really part of the value chains. You take more things from a distance, and this enables a conversation, and you can also link different actions or different players of the value chain, because you talk to all of them. So it's for us it was also good to see that we could do that type of enabling functions. Because clearly they are the domain specialists. We will not be the ones coming up with the problems to solve or the solutions, but at least by talking and by understanding, we could facilitate here and then some progress.
And I guess, in principle, at least effectively improve your own proposition in the long term.
Sure. The better we understand the customers, the better we understand the problems that they want to solve, the better we can do our work. Yeah. But it's by combining the technological knowledge that we have on remote sensing with the domain expertise that not only the growers, but also the processors, the traders, the nutrition people, the entire value chain have. Is by combining those domains that we can go to a multidisciplinary approach of problem solving. And I think that is what is needed.
No, I think that's a very, very strong message. Thank you very much. I think this can really, hopefully, motivate our partners in eSeBS to basically, see the value of doing such an analysis, see the value of engaging with the stakeholders along the value chain in that regard. And hopefully we can do a nice job extrapolating now the methodology we used in your specific case.
Okay.
Of course, to the extent that this is applicable, but we're ready to take this challenge.
Okay, I wish you good luck in the next endeavors. And if you want to talk about potatoes again, give me a call.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
So, and with this very happy end of this session, we open the floor again for questions. I guess there is one that maybe Jeff can take right away, raised by Harris.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Harris. Yeah, I mean, within eShape, our focus is going to be more on extrapolation, but we're going to need to talk with all the pilots to understand where they're going in order to develop those indicators I mentioned earlier. And outside of eShape, we're always looking for good subjects to analyze. So we're happy to talk further about possible work there.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I guess this is the only really raised question at this stage. Oh no, there is more coming. No, it's just Thierry thanking us. I have asked for a slight extension of the time that we have in our disposal. So I guess we don't need to really worry that we will go dark right away. From my side, and as a sort of summary of what we heard from both sessions today, I would just like to say that, yeah, all this falls under Work Package 5. We have been designing it and starting to build it to a very large extent in connection to the sustainability booster. And clearly in the next steps, the interaction between the people working primarily at work package level and those working in the different pilots is essential. So we will really try to nurture this relationship. And yeah, with regards to the socioeconomic analysis parts, the first main focus would be on agriculture. We have a few methodological challenges to define and then hopefully overcome. And yeah, we would then subsequently look into some of the other sectors. So hopefully, again, we will produce something that, as you also heard Stephen from Vito describe, would be a strong marketing tool for the service providers, would be a very good starting point for either the engaged or new users to understand what the different EO services do for them. And in a certain way, it would also help the greater ecosystem get better engaged. So unless there is any final burning question at this point, I think we can close this session. And I would probably encourage you again, if you have any sort of later thoughts about things you want to raise, I believe we would still have access to the Q&A part, so feel free to raise it there. And with that, I would like to very much thank everyone. I don't know if Jeff, you want to make any other final statement?
Well, only to encourage people if they wish to to be in contact, and we're here to try and help the pilots develop further. And the more that we can link that to other activities that are going on, the better. And there are a number of such activities that certainly ERSCA pursuing that can help. So it's a lot now is about synergy and about bringing these different tools together to really help the community.
Indeed, exactly. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the General Assembly. We will be around, I guess, in different sessions. So we should be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lef.